In the previous lesson, we saw how we can work with textures in REDSHIFT, creating materials that are more physically based and more realistic instead of using just standard colors. So we can use textures for many reasons and many effects. We're going to see other effects in this video, like the superficial 3D effect, which simulates 3D details that are not actually there. And we can use the bump map for that and a normal map, and also the displacement, which is an actual 3D extrusion of parts of the material. So we introduce the so-called graph editor or shader graph, which is the to edit the various materials with the various nodes and channels and parameters. And so we just started to insert some of these nodes and organize and manage everything inside. And we can use a texture for many reasons, not just for the base color, but we can use it for the roughness, the metalness, especially if it is black and white or pretty dark and pretty white, like with a lot of contrast. Now, this is the model we used in the previous lesson, which came with a diffuse texture. And so we use that diffuse texture to try different effects. In this video, I want to go back to another object, another project that I also used in another video. And this is a floating tiny home and from Sketchfab, and that's the author right there. And this is good because we have like exterior and interior, and it's not so big. So we gonna go outside for this lesson right here. So this is the file that we set up a few lessons ago, talking about the natural light with the portal light and the sunlight and the skylight and the environment light and so on. So we're gonna use this, and I'm gonna go on the outside. So we have now, we can work a little bit on the exterior as well as we worked on the interior. And I want to change this material right here. Now, fortunately, when we import from other software or from Sketchfab, Redshift helps us to convert all the materials. As we saw, we can use a tool called the material and converter and replace the original material with Redshift material. So if I use the picker here and click on this, I can check if I double click or enter the graph editor, the shader graph, I can see there you go, the structure here, which is really simple. So we don't have anything but the diffuse and a node here for the material and the output node. So nothing too fancy, but good enough to be used with Redshift. So there is a conversion, but it's not like creating a material in all its aspects, creating a nice PBR materials, physically based render material. So we're gonna see how we can do that using textures. Not only the diffuse texture as it is at the moment, but we're gonna get also the other texture that we need. Well, the most important ones at least, because we have a lot of possibilities, a lot of types of textures we can use. So I'm gonna show you which ones are the most important and how we can bring them in here and how we can adjust them. Also using, as I said before, some extra nodes. Now I've just unlinked the previous material, so there you go. It just disappeared in the viewport, which is currently rendering interactively. And we're gonna start with this basic gray flat, and we're gonna add some materials. Now, another important topic is the mapping, because if you have an object that has not been mapped correctly in your project, well, that's gonna give you trouble. So usually you take care of the mapping in the software that you're using, whether it's Cinema 4D or 3ds Max or Blender or wherever. So make sure you have a correct mapping of your object. Otherwise, you need to do it right away using also Redshift if you want. And the first thing you can consider when mapping is the tiling. So how many repetition you have of that particular material tile. Now, you don't need to do tiles in meaning that you can do also all sorts of materials, not just tiles. You can do wood planks or bricks or whatever. This is just a term that refers to the repetition of something. And when you have a tiling, this is to cover large areas with a tiny texture. So you don't need to download like really big and heavy texture. You just create a material with a tiling effect to cover large areas. Now, if we're looking for something specific, we can search for it in Google. So we can type like texture wood. But even better is if we add the seamless term, which means that it's not going to have seams. So it's not going to be, there's not going to be separation between one tile and the other, so that that texture can be tileable. So, and it doesn't show the seams. Now there are ways to hide the seams if there are like errors in the texture, but generally speaking, to avoid the seams, just look for seamless and look for images that are pretty flat in terms of lining, so they don't have like darker areas or brighter areas. Now, I'm gonna show you where to get like more professional textures, but in general, you can use any image for a texture. Now, some images are tileable, some images are non-tileable. So tileable images are, for example, a flat, non-perspective image that you can repeat over and over again. So with the tiling, and again, this is also called seamless. Otherwise, all the other images, including the unwrap map that we saw in the statue we used in the previous video, which was unwrapped. Well, this cannot be repeated. This can only be placed once, so it's a non-repeatable texture. All the other like single images, like for pictures, if you want to do a picture or a logo or a poster or a TV screen, wherever, usually they're non-repeatable. You can only place them once because they are intended to represent something that, again, is not to be repeated. And you can see this in packaging, also in graphic design, and so on. So usually you want to add a graphic and that's it. Sometimes you can repeat a logo many times or a graphic, but usually no. So we're gonna see how we can create our first physically based render texture or PBR using the various textures to create the materials. To do that, the quickest way is to use websites that are going to give you the entire package, because you need the most important textures. You need 3 or 4, let's say, most important textures, I think, at least, to have a nice material. Now, if you open up this one here, that's an example. So you need usually a diffuse or base or albedo, it's called sometimes, which is the most superficial effect. You need a normal map or a bump map to represent the fake 3D superficial effect. You use a metallic usually to define whether the material is metal or non-metal, or if there are some areas that are metallic and some other areas that are not. And then you have the roughness, which sometimes you can use, sometimes you can use the glossiness. You just need to invert. So roughness, glossiness to define the specularity or the glossiness of the object. And sometimes you also have like ambient occlusion and other stuff. But the most important 4 are those 4. Well, actually, we can make it 3. So the diffuse, the normal or bump, and the roughness. These are the 3 most important ones that you need to have. And you can create them, for example, using Substance, which is a software specifically created to develop the textures, or you can use any other software, or there are also like web apps that do these websites that create normal maps or height maps or bump maps or whatever. And you'll find them also in the channel if you look for them, like how to create a normal or normal creation. Now for this example, I'm just going to go directly to Polyoven. Here you can find a lot of free HRIs, as we saw, textures and also models. Now we're going to go for textures, and you can see all the different categories. You can go into the woods, for example, and in the woods, we're going to look for something like planks, something to replace the original ones, to show you how you can create that effect from the beginning. So you just need to pick one, and I'm gonna go with some really rough planks like this. So these are, you can see the single planks is really visible. There is a visible separation vertically or horizontally, but there is not on the other orientation. So these are supposed to be seamless in a direction. Now you can choose the resolution here. You can use 1K, 4K. Now let's go for 1K. 8K is going to be really heavy. So you only do that if you're really close to the object. Otherwise, you choose like 1K or even lower